Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to basically pull out the crucial bits from complex sources so you don't have to wade through them all.
Kind of like your cheat sheet to getting informed.
Exactly. And today we're diving into the April 2025 guide, The Cost of Cyber Defense. This is version 1.1.
Yeah, and this one's important because it updates previous work, specifically adding cloud service providers, CSPs, and managed service providers, MSPs, into the cost mix.
Which is huge because so many businesses rely on them now. So if you're asking, where do I even start with cyber protection?
Or what tools do I actually need?
And the big one, how much is this fundamental stuff actually going to cost? Then, well, you're in the right place.
We're going to unpack the costs for getting CIS Controls Implementation Group 1, that's IG1 set up.
Right. For you, the learner, our goal is to make sense of these cyber costs without, drowning you in jargon.
And just before we jump in, a quick thank you to our show sponsor, www.cisomarketplace.services.
Okay, let's get into it. This cost of cyber defense guide. Why did CIS, the Center for Internet Security, put this together in the first place? What gap were they filling?
Well, it really boils down to answering three key questions that, honestly, every organization bumps up against.
Which are?
First, which basic protections should we prioritize? Second, what kinds of tools do we need for those? And third, what's the likely price tag?
Makes sense. And the big change in this version 1.1 is adding CSPs and MSPs.
Exactly. It's a recognition that, the IT world has shifted. Lots of places use outsourced services or a hybrid setup.
So understanding costs in that context is vital now.
Absolutely. For budgeting, for planning, you need those numbers.
And it's worth remembering CIS is a nonprofit, right? How does that influence this work?
It's pretty significant, actually. Their mission is driven by volunteers, people from the community, all focus on making the internet safer for everyone.
So it's not vendor-driven?
Not at all. It's meant to be unbiased, collaborative guidance. Plus, they release it under a Creative Commons license, meaning people can use it, share it non-commercially, as long as they give credit. The goal is sharing knowledge, not making a profit off the guide itself.
Okay, so objective advice. Now, they really hammer home this idea of starting with IG1. What exactly is IG1?
So the CIS controls are basically a prioritized list of cybersecurity actions. Think of it like a to-do list, but ordered by importance.
And IG1 is the top priority.
It's implementation group 1, yeah. It's the foundational stuff. CIS calls it essential cyber hygiene. It's especially designed for, say, small to medium enterprises.
The absolute must-dos.
Pretty much. It's the base layer you need before you tackle the more complex controls in IG2 or IG3.
Like building a house, you need the foundation first.
That's a great analogy. You need those core practices locked down. And the data they cite is, frankly, really compelling.
Oh, yeah.
According to their own model, the CIS Community Defense Model V2.0, just implementing IG1, just the basics. It can defend against something like 74% of the attack techniques listed in the INRI ATT&CK framework.
Wait, 74%? Just from IG1?
74%.
Yeah.
It really shows the power of getting those fundamentals right.
Wow. And for anyone listening, the MIT AT&CK framework is like this huge database of all the ways attackers try to get in. So covering 3/4 of that.
It's a massive return on investment, focusing on IG1 first.
So what kind of things are in IG1? Is it some huge, scary list?
Well, there are 56 specific actions called safeguards. But to make it easier to grasp, the guide groups them into 10 main categories.
Okay, that sounds more manageable.
Things like asset management, basically knowing what hardware and software you actually have.
Right, inventory.
Exactly. Then data management, protecting your important info. Secure configurations, making sure systems aren't set up poorly.
Default passwords and things like that.
Yeah, avoiding those basic mistakes. And account and access control management, who gets access to what, things like that.
Okay, that gives a good feel for it. A structured way to tackle the basics. Now, the $1 million question, or maybe the few $1,000 question, the cost. The guide starts with on-premises tools.
It does. It builds on their earlier research from version 1.0. They take those 10 categories.
Asset management, data management, etc.
Right. And they map the IG1 safeguards in those categories to the types of generic tools you typically use if you're running everything in-house, on-prem.
But costs vary wildly depending on the company size, right?
Hugely. So to handle that, they created 3 hypothetical company profiles. Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3.
Based on?
Things like employee count, how many IT staff they have, number of systems, log sizes, even revenue. Tier 1 is the smallest. Tier 3 is a larger SME.
So you can find a tier that roughly matches your own situation.
That's the idea. It gives context to the pricing.
And then for each tool category, within each tier, they give cost ranges.
Yep. They looked at over 200 actual vendor tools. And for each category and tier, they show 3 price points. No cost options.
Like open source or manual processes.
Maybe, yeah. Then the low end for a commercial tool and the high end they found for a commercial tool. It gives you a spectrum.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Like for tier 1, the smallest businesses looking at asset management tools. The guide might show a range from $0, maybe a spreadsheet,
Right.
up to maybe around $2,044 for a commercial tool with more features. It shows there are options at different price points, even for basics.
That's super helpful for budgeting. And they also mentioned that tools often do more than one thing.
Yes, that's a key point for efficiency. You might buy a vulnerability scanner, which is mainly for secure configurations, but it might also help with your software inventory, which falls under asset management. So one tool can tick multiple boxes.
Potentially fewer tools to buy and manage then.
Exactly. Streamlines things.
Now, super important question about these costs. Do these numbers include everything, like the people needed to run the tools?
Good question. The guide is clear on this. The costs they show are primarily for buying the tool itself.
So not the labor?
Generally, no. It usually doesn't include the staff time to set it up, configure it, manage it.
Or training. Or ongoing updates.
Right. Those are all additional and often significant costs that organizations absolutely need to factor in. The tool price is just one piece.
Okay, so keep that in mind. It's the tool cost, not the total cost of ownership.
Got it.
Let's pivot to the new stuff in version 1.1, the cloud and managed services angle. Why the focus here now?
Well, like we touched on, SMEs face real challenges. Limited budgets, tech moving super fast, regulations getting complex.
And often not enough skilled security people in-house.
Exactly. So what do? Very often they turn to cloud service providers, CSPs, or managed service providers, MSPs, to handle IT and security.
It's just the reality for many businesses.
It is. So CIS recognized they needed to provide cost guidance specifically for achieving IG1 in those kinds of outsourced or hybrid setups.
So how does IG1 apply when you're using, say, AWS or Azure, or you have an MSP? It's not just set it and forget it, assuming the provider does everything.
Oh, definitely not. That's a critical misunderstanding to avoid. When you outsource, security becomes a shared responsibility.
Shared. How so?
You absolutely need clear service level agreements, SLAs, with your providers. Think of the SLA as the contract detailing who does what. It has to spell out which security controls the provider handles and which ones are still on you, the customer. Without that clarity,
things get missed. Big things.
Exactly. Gaps open up.
So even if you're using a big cloud provider, you can't just assume they've magically implemented all of IG1 for you.
Nope. CSPs and MSPs offer huge benefits, scalability, cost savings sometimes. They handle platform patching, often strong authentication.
Sure.
But you, the organization, still need to know precisely what your responsibilities are in that shared model.
Does the guide help with that? Does it map provider services to the controls?
It does. Table 3 in the guide does exactly that. It shows how typical services from CSPs and MSPs align with those 10 tool categories we talked about for on-prem.
And what's the general finding? How much of IG1 can you cover this way?
Well, their analysis suggests you can get about 80% coverage of IG1 just using a typical CSP.
80%, why not 100?
The gap, that last 20%, often comes down to things like creating and enforcing your own specific security policies. CSPs usually provide the tools, but you define the policies.
Okay. What about MSPs?
MSPs often do include policy creation and management as part of their service. So the guide suggests that working with an MSP could potentially get you to 100% IG1 coverage through outsourcing.
That's a really important difference between just using cloud infrastructure and using a managed service.
The very key distinction, yes.
And if you are using one of the big cloud platforms like AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud,
there's more help. Appendix G gives specific mappings for those 3.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it shows which native tools and services on those specific platforms can help you meet particular IG1 safeguards. Yeah, quite granular.
But even with all that, are there still some IG1 things that are hard to fully outsource? Things you'll likely still need to handle internally to some degree?
Yes. The guide points out a few examples. Truly comprehensive asset management, knowing all your assets, software accounts, especially if you have a mix of cloud and on-prem stuff. That can be tricky for a provider to do completely.
Makes sense. They might not see everything.
Right. Also, account management in a hybrid world can get complicated, and sometimes the specific customization options in a cloud platform might not perfectly match every single IG1 requirement the way an on-prem tool might allow.
So still need some internal oversight and potentially some internal effort.
Definitely. And they also point to another CIS resource specifically for working with MSPs.
Which one?
It's a guide called Establish Basic Cyber Hygiene Controls Through a Managed Service Provider, MSP. Good supplementary reading if you're going that route.
Okay, good to know. So we've got on-prem tool costs. We know CSPs, MSPs can cover a lot. What about the cost for those outsourced options? How do they stack up?
Table 5 tackles that. It gives example cost ranges for CSP and MSP services. Again, broken down by those Tier 1, 2, and 3 profiles.
So you can compare directly to the on-prem tool costs.
You can, but there's an important caveat the guide stresses.
Which is?
Many CSP and MSP costs get rolled into your general IT budget, not listed as separate cybersecurity expenses. So you really need to compare these outsourced costs against your total IT spend to understand the real financial impact.
Can you give a ballpark figure from the table?
Sure. For example, for a Tier 1 org, the guide might show annual MSP pricing for IG1 level services somewhere in the range of, say, $23,000 to $41,000.
Okay, so that gives a starting point for budgeting conversations.
Exactly. A rough idea.
And why the big range in costs for CSPs and MSPs? What drives the price up or down?
Oh, lots of factors. For CSPs, it's things like the service model you choose, ISO, POS, SaaS.
How much compute or storage you use.
Right, resource consumption, network traffic, storage type, performance needs, support levels, even the geographic region your data's in.
Lots of variables.
And for MSPs, it's often tied to the number of users or devices they're supporting, the specific apps they manage, the overall scope of services in the contract. Appendix H in the guide actually lists out more of these cost drivers.
So definitely not one-size-fits-all pricing. You need to know your requirements.
Precisely. Understand your needs, negotiate clear agreements.
Okay. So bringing this all together as we wrap up, what are the absolute must-know takeaways from this guide for the learner listening in?
I think the biggest one is that getting that foundational IG1 cyber hygiene in place, it's really effective. Remember the 74% defense against common attacks.
Right, that was striking.
And it can be done cost effectively.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to break the bank.
Okay. What else?
Also, the fact that cyber insurers are increasingly demanding IG1 controls, that's becoming a business necessity for getting coverage.
A direct financial link there.
Absolutely. And while figuring out CSP and MSP costs can feel complex with all those variables.
Yeah, sounds like it.
This guide gives you a much-needed starting point, a framework for thinking about the investment.
And the overall cost of IG1, however you do it, should fit within typical IT budgets.
Generally, yes. The research suggests the cost, whether on-prem, outsourced, or hybrid, should be manageable within normal IT and security spending levels for most organizations.
It sounds like CIS plans to keep refining this too.
Definitely. They see it as an ongoing project, improving the cost findings, maybe expanding the scope as things change.
But the core message is?
The core message is really quite simple. Start now. Implement essential cyber hygiene. Don't wait to become a victim, because that's always the most expensive option.
Couldn't agree more. That's a powerful takeaway. So to sum up our deep dive, IG1 foundational security is incredibly valuable, cost-effective, and there are more ways than ever to implement it on-prem, cloud, managed services, or a mix.
And this cost of cyber defense guide really does give you, the learner, a solid framework to think strategically about where to put your security dollars and have those informed talks.
So think about your own situation. What makes sense for you? On-prem, hybrid, fully outsourced. Dig into those CIS resources we mentioned, the control site, the other guides in Appendix I. They're really helpful.
Definitely worth exploring.
And before we leave you with the final thought, one more thank you to our show sponsor, www.cisomarketplace.services.
Great folks supporting important conversations.
Absolutely. Okay, so here's something to chew on. With threats always changing and everyone relying more and more on third parties, how are businesses going to best balance keeping costs down with actually achieving real, comprehensive cyber defense in the future?
That's the question, isn't it? Balancing cost and effectiveness in this evolving landscape, something we'll all be grappling with.